He was once the pride of South African football, the man who brought the World Cup to Africa, celebrated as a hero and trusted as a leader. But behind the shining lights of 2010 lay shadows that refused to fade. Whispers of missing funds, secret contracts, and unchecked power slowly built into a storm that no one could ignore. By 2024, investigators moved in, and the empire he built came crashing down. Danny Jordaan's story starts in Port Elizabeth, a coastal city where he grew up in poverty. Though he wasn't born into money or power, he had a fierce drive that made him stand out. He knew from a young age that both school and sports could help him. For him, football was more than just a game. It was a sign of hope in a country that was having a hard time coming together. Those early lessons pushed him to go places that most people thought were out of his league. Jordaan saw his chance to shine as South Africa moved from apartheid to freedom. He talked about football in a way that everyone could understand and said it could bring people together. People on both sides of society trusted him because he could talk to both politicians and football fans. Others were having a hard time finding common ground, but Jordaan saw himself as able to bring politics and sports together. That bridge made him known, and soon he was very strong. Because of his charm and political connections, he was able to get into places that most people would never be able to. By the end of the 1,990 seconds, Jordaan was already moving up in the football governing systems. He knew how to use relationships to get what he wanted, shaking hands with powerful people who could help him get ahead. Each meeting and link brought him one step closer to his dream. The goal was to bring the world's best event to Africa, which was a dream bigger than South Africa. As South Africa began its bid to host the 2010 FIFA World Cup, Jordaan was the first person that everyone saw. He seemed sure of himself, convincing and determined to complete his task. He talked to the FIFA members with the authority of a politician and the passion of a salesman. Every time a camera caught him with Nelson Mandela, he became a trusted national figure in people's thoughts. Many people saw Jordaan as more than just a football player. They saw him as the spirit of South Africa. In 2004, FIFA revealed that South Africa had won the right to host the World Cup. The campaign had worked. The country went crazy with happiness, and Jordaan's name will go down in history. People thought of him as the person who had made Africa happiest in sports. Every stadium he built and every speech he gave made his image better. When the first whistle went off in 2010, Jordaan was already thought to be invincible. The World Cup was a show that changed how people around the world saw South Africa. There were fans in the streets from all over the world. Vuvuzelas could be heard in the stadiums, and billions of people watched the game on TV. Jordaan was everywhere. He met FIFA leaders, went to ceremonies, and smiled for cameras around the world. The event was praised around the world, and his influence was praised both at home and abroad. It looked like nothing could ever take away his power at that moment. His rise did not slow down after the World Cup. He used the energy to get a stronger grip on football in South Africa. His power over football in the country was fully given to him when he became head of the South African Football Association, SAFA. Almost all important decisions were made by him, which gave him power over football and millions of fans. The man from Port Elizabeth had made it to the top. However, power always brings bad things. As Jordaan became more established in SAFA, he started to hold more power and make decisions from one place. All budgets, contracts, and projects had to go through him. The people thought it was good leadership. For those on the inside, it looked like too much power. People who knew what was going on started to talk about financial secrets and fuzzy lines. Thoughts about Jordaan were still kept quiet because most people saw him as their hero. People saw him as the man who won the World Cup bid, so they didn't question it. People who voiced worries were often ignored or brushed off as competitors. The money kept coming in, but not many people outside of his group knew where it all went. The trust and silence that held it together were very weak. South African football made a lot of money after the World Cup. There were new stadiums and better roads, and billions of rands had been put into the game's funds. A lot of sponsorship deals came in, and FIFA funds ensured that grassroots development would have a bright future. And in this case, Danny Jordaan held the very keys in his hands. Now that he had a lot of power, Jordaan carefully grew his inner group. He surrounded himself with people who worked for him and never anyone else. People in SAFA who spoke out against the group were ignored or quietly shut down. It became easy to guess how the board would vote because every move leaned toward him. In that country, loyalty was more important than being honest. The first cracks showed up when reporters looked into how contracts were given. Public relations firms, event planners, and security firms were getting millions of dollars in bids. But Some of these businesses didn't have much of a track record, and others were connected to people close to Jordaan. On paper, the numbers were way too high compared to what they were worth. The pattern made me think of deals that were done behind closed doors. Some brave workers at SAFA started giving out documents. Journalists started getting emails and contracts that made them want to know what was going on. But instead of leading to changes, the reporters were met with strong opposition. People who disagreed were called envious takers or angry political opponents. It was clear, if you challenged Jordaan, you would lose. Even so, Jordaan stayed a polished person when he wasn't in a meeting. He knew how to say the right things, and cameras loved him. As the crowd cheered, he talked about youth projects, football unity, and the legacy of 2010. People still thought of him as the one who brought the world to South Africa. Every month, the difference between how people saw him and how he really was grew. The money trail kept making people suspicious behind closed doors. Auditors saw problems, but official reports didn't seem to show up or move at all. Security bids were approved without any competing bids. PR jobs worth millions of dollars were given to companies with sketchy pasts. Each new finding led to a bigger scheme to steal money. The media started to link things that some people wanted to stay hidden. They wrote stories about companies with fake office addresses and numbers that were too high. It was starting to look like football was being used as a bank. But when asked, Jordaan denied doing anything wrong and said the press was trying to make a big deal out of nothing. With his charm and political connections, he was able to avoid instant trouble. However, documents don't bend when they're stressed. So, it got more difficult to ignore the leaks as they got bigger and louder. Many people started to talk about funds that disappeared and recipients who were not clear. What investigators were getting on their desks could no longer be brushed off. It was clear that the trail led back to the center of SAFA. But Jordaan acted like he couldn't be hurt. He went from meeting to meeting, shaking hands with presidents and supporters. On TV, he was all smiles and talked about how the game would do well in the future. But the mask was starting to show in rumors and news stories. He could no longer make his kingdom look as strong as it had before. However, as the noise got louder, the police became more focused. They did not want talks, but answers. The PR spin could no longer hide the papers that were piling up. Jordaan's stronghold started to look weak for the first time. Soon enough, those papers would bring the storm right to his door. By 2023, the rumors were making the news. Reporters who were looking into the claims said that SAFA was doing something wrong with its money, citing strange costs that couldn't be ignored. A lot of money was being given to public relations firms whose services were not clear. Budgets were drained by security contracts that didn't show much work was done. The controversy had begun with its first sparks. As the reporters dug deeper, it became clearer how the plan worked. Money that was supposed to go to football was being wasted on things like overpriced contracts and spending that wasn't approved. A lot of the time, image management that PR firms charged for was just talks and fancy press releases. Security firms charged as much as they would for protecting leaders, but grassroots games didn't see any extra value. Money trails led to people who benefited from things that had nothing to do with sports. The people who toiled the most weren't in the boardrooms, but on the dusty fields all over South Africa. There wasn't enough money to train or equip young players in grassroots football groups, so they stopped playing. Youth schools that looked like they would help kids shut down when the help never came. In places where people used to think sports would change lives, those hopes have been dashed. The missed chances were the secret cost of greed that wasn't checked. As more information came out, the pressure grew. Every story was blown out of proportion in South African media, with headlines asking how national football funds could be lost so easily. When the questions got to Parliament, politicians called for SAFA's leaders to be held accountable. Callers to radio shows were full of angry and disappointed people. It was no longer just a sports story. It had turned into a national issue. The puzzle was being put together behind the scenes by detectives. In secret, warrants were written, and companies with contracts were put on government watch lists. For months, police gathered bank records, statements, and secret tips. Even though the walls were closing in on Jordaan, he still acted like he couldn't be touched. Reality was getting closer and closer to what people thought it was. Then things began to change. Late in 2024, police showed up at SAFA offices with warrants in hand. Staff were shocked to see inspectors storm into offices and start taking files. People who worked there could see that hard drives, contracts, and personal devices were locked up in boxes. The raid was both exciting and symbolic. It meant that the empire was being taken apart. Outside, the press swarmed as soon as the raid was reported. Images of people carrying boxes out of the building were shown on TVs all over the country. Critics had been warning for years about bad money management, but now there was clear evidence that the government was paying attention. Fans, players, and past officials were shocked by what they saw. They were seeing what had once seemed impossible happen. What was in those boxes were the answers that everyone had been asking for. Investigators now had emails that showed hidden approvals, contracts that were signed without anyone checking, and records of numbers that were too high. The paper trail could no longer be hidden behind closed office doors. It was made public so that lawyers, accountants, and anyone else could look at it. The clock had finally begun to run for Jordaan. But Jordaan tried to stay calm, even though the raid made Safa very nervous. He said that the action was not important because it was politically motivated. His supporters said the same thing, saying that South African football's honor was being unfairly attacked. But denying it couldn't hide the fact that police were taking proof away by the truckload. The public already didn't like him anymore. The investigation was the start of the end. There were no longer any rumors or guesses involved. This was real proof being taken away during the day. Speeches could not shut down contracts and numbers. It was the same system that used to protect him that was now working against him. Dan Jordaan was going to fall. It wasn't a matter of if, but when. When the police left with boxes of files and hard drives, the king of South African football's image was broken. What started out as rumors of wrongdoing with money was now an obvious fact. The country was shocked to see its most famous football boss on the verge of falling. His past success was no longer a shield for him. His end was now certain. When the cops searched Safa's offices in the morning, the whole building went quiet. Officers moved quickly and carefully, taking papers, laptops, and bank records. People who used to walk past Jordaan with respect were now frozen in shock. South African football was once invincible, but all of a sudden it was under attack. For many, it was the moment they saw the kingdom fall apart. Box after box was filled with files that had been kept secret for years. It was easy to see that there were questionable contracts, hidden deals, and shady paper tracks. As soon as the news spread, phones rang all over the city, and TVs showed pictures of police officers leaving with proof. The raid wasn't just a search, it was a statement to the world. No one was safe, not even the strongest football player. After a few days, things got even worse. The person who was arrested was Danny Jordaan. The guy who was once praised as a hero was now being led away in front of cameras, and it was impossible to read his face. He sat there with a blank look on his face as charges of fraud and theft were read out loud in court. Even though his defenders said he wasn't guilty, the pictures showed otherwise. Those shots of Jordaan being walked by police officers became unforgettable. In newspapers and on social media, they were all over. People who used to sing his name now share posts calling for justice. Not only was his fall from favor legal, it also meant a lot. The football king was now tied down by a scandal. The media kept talking about the show over and over again. Every court appearance, every leaked detail, and every whispered story was broken down by TV hosts. People on talk shows disagreed on whether Jordaan had failed the country. Journalists went back and looked at his old talks about unity and legacy and compared them to the new charges. His public image, which used to be his biggest strength, was now working against him. People who used to be happy to stand by his side started to leave. The politicians who used to praise him didn't say anything. His business partners pulled out of deals that were tied to his name. Even within Safa, people stopped being loyal as leaders rushed to keep themselves safe. The close group of people he had carefully formed started to fall apart. Fans felt the deception the most. A lot of people remembered how proud South Africa was when it welcomed the world in 2010 with happiness and hope. They had faith in Jordaan's claim that sports could change people's lives. Angry, they now watched as news stories showed that money meant for young players had been lost. Instead of shouts of support, people were asked to answer for their actions. The damage was already done and could not be fixed before the decision was given. The proof and public opinion against Jordaan were too much for him to handle. His influence in football circles went away overnight. Sponsors stayed away from him because they were afraid of being linked to his name. The golden things he left behind were now just dust. The failure was not only personal, it was also important in history. Jordaan was the face of South African football for many years. He is known for putting the country on the world stage. His fall, on the other hand, meant the end of a whole dream. A lot of people thought he had failed not only the sport, but also the country. And since the cameras were following him around, it was hard to miss the meaning. The man who stood proudly next to Nelson Mandela was now in front of judges and inspectors. The smile that used to bring hope was gone, and the lights in the courtroom took its place. The big-picture leader of football had become its most divisive figure. It was both shocking and sad how different they were. SAFA was a mess after Jordaan fell. Before renewing their agreements, sponsors started to want more information. People who had been quiet before now wanted to know how the money was handled. When there was suddenly no one in charge, it led to nasty fights within the group. South African football was hurt and is now looking for security. The fight for power inside the federation got very violent. Quickly, groups formed, and each claimed to be the one to rebuild SAFA. As claims flew about who had helped Jordaan for so long, meetings became tense. There was no longer any trust in the group. The body that was meant to protect the football looked like it could not be fixed. People all over the country talked about what Jordaan's real impact should be outside of politics. His supporters said that getting the 2010 World Cup to Africa for the first time was his biggest accomplishment. They said that moment could never be erased, even if he did bad things later. Many people will never forget the pictures of Nelson Mandela waving in a venue full of happy people. But even that memory had dark sides now. Critics replied with a harsher truth. They said that success doesn't mean much if it's followed by betrayal. It was not only Jordaan's name that was ruined by the scandal, but also the whole year of 2010. The thing that should have been a sign of pride was now linked to questions of greed and corruption. It changed the magic of that year when the man who had once embodied it crashed. The bigger lesson wasn't just about Jordaan. The event demonstrated what takes place when institutions do not check the abuse of power. Leadership can change the rules for personal gain if they are not held accountable. People at the bottom are always the ones who get hurt, never those at the top. The people who paid the price were grassroots players, fans, and whole towns. With every rand that was wasted, dreams that could have been fostered in youth academies were lost. Community fields that could have been built upon were left empty. Young football players who saw the game as a way out of tough times were left alone. These losses that no one saw were worse than any story in the news. They showed what greed really cost. The moral of the story went even further. The report said that corruption in sports is not just a problem in one country. When a government fails, federations all over the world face the same risks. When leaders think they are better than the game itself loses. This truth was shown through Jordaan's story. It will take years for South African sports to rebuild trust. Fans no longer listen to talks that make a lot of promises. They want to know who is responsible for what, and see proof that money gets to the parks where kids play. The only way to move forward is to learn from the empire's flaws. If we don't change things, history might happen again. Jordaan's fall was a wake-up call for FIFA and federations around the world. It's great to be proud of big events like the World Cup, but they also bring in a lot of money. Those rivers can destroy the sports they're supposed to promote if they aren't closely watched. Jordaan showed how quickly a hero can become someone to be wary of. His name was permanently etched on the list of one of the worst things to have happened to football in my South African history. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next video.